All right, let's get right into it. If you've ever touched Django, you know it's all about this philosophy of clean, pragmatic design. And sitting right at the heart of that is its template system. It's this powerful engine that's really designed to keep your presentation layer, the stuff the user actually sees, neat, secure, and totally separate from all your back-end logic. So today, we're going to tear it down and see exactly how it works. But first, let's talk about a problem that, let's be honest, every single one of us has faced. You start a new project and everything's perfect. It's organized, it's beautiful, but then it grows. You add more features, the deadlines start getting closer, and before you know it, things are a tangled mess. Your logic is all mixed up with your presentation, and that clean code base you started with, it feels totally unmanageable. So why does that happen? Well, it usually looks a lot like this. Over on the left, you've got what we all call spaghetti code. It's where your Python logic is just woven right into your HTML. It is an absolute nightmare to debug, a real headache to maintain. Now contrast that with Django's answer on the right, a clean, strict separation. Each part has its own box, its own job, which makes it possible for designers and developers to actually work at the same time without tripping over each other. And this solution, it's not just some friendly advice. It's a core architectural pattern that's literally baked into the framework. It's called the Model View Template Pattern, or MVT for short. So let's break that down real quick. The model, that's your data. It's the part that talks to your database. The view, think of that as the brain of the operation. It's got the business logic, it grabs data from the model, and it decides what to do. And finally, you've got the template. Its only job is to display the data that the view gives it. That's it. Each part has a very specific job, and they do not cross the streams. The whole structure is guided by one of the most important rules in software development. Don't repeat yourself, or DRY. By separating things this way, Django makes it so much easier to reuse your code and avoid doing the same thing over and over. And we're about to see the perfect example of that in action. So how do you actually work inside this presentation layer? You use something called the Django Template Language, or DTL. It sounds fancy, but it's really just a simple syntax made up of three fundamental building blocks. First up, you've got variables. These are just your placeholders for data. Super simple. When your view passes information to the template, like a username, you just pop it into these double curly braces, like get username, to make it show up on the page. It's a direct pipeline for your dynamic content. But what if you need to format that data? Maybe you want to make a blog post title all uppercase or display a date in a nice, human-readable way. That's exactly what filters are for. You just add a pipe character after the variable and tell it what to do. So you could have single post.title upper or single post.pubdate/date FJY, and it just works. No extra logic needed in your view. And finally, we have tags. Now, this is where the real power of the DTL kicks in. Tags give you control flow, the programming-like logic. You can use them to loop through a list of items with a @4% loop, or maybe show certain content only if a user is logged in with an @if% tag. But, and this is a really important part of the Django philosophy, this logic is intentionally limited. It's just enough to handle presentation, keeping your templates clean and focused. Okay, but when you write something like user.profile.name, how does Django actually know what that means? It doesn't just guess. It follows a very strict order to find the right piece of data. First, it checks if it's a dictionary key. If not, it checks if it's an object attribute. Still no luck? It'll try to call it as a method. And as a final fallback, it'll check if it's a list index. It's super flexible, but Django's real secret weapon for staying dry is a much, much bigger idea. And that idea is template inheritance. Remember we talked about the dry principle? Well, this is probably the most powerful example of it in all of Django. This is the feature that saves you from having to copy and paste your website's header and footer onto every single page you make. It all starts with a base template, something like this base.html file. You should think of this as the master blueprint for your site. It has all the common stuff, the navigation bar, the footer, the main HTML structure, and the most important parts are these PHYZ block tags. Think of them as empty slots, just waiting to be filled in. And here's where the magic happens. A child template starts with one simple line, %extends base.html, %. That tells Django, hey, go grab that blueprint. Then all this file has to do is define the content for the blocks it wants to fill in. When Django renders the page, it takes the content from this child file and injects it right into the parent's content block. It's clean, it's simple, and there's zero repetition. So by default, child blocks completely replace parent blocks. But what if you just want to add to what the parent already has? Well, that's where block.super comes in. It's this awesome little variable that renders the original content from the parent. This is perfect for something like a scripts block. Maybe your base template has some site-wide JavaScript, and on just one page, you need to add another little script without losing the originals. You just use block.super and add your new stuff right after it. Now, all this strict separation and careful design, it isn't just for keeping your project organized. It has huge, real-world consequences for two things that every single developer has to care about: security and performance. Let's start with security. One of the most common attacks on the web is cross-site scripting, or XSS. That's where an attacker tries to inject malicious code into your page. Well, Django protects you from this automatically. By default, it escapes any variable data, which means it turns dangerous characters like those angle brackets into harmless HTML codes. So a malicious script just gets printed to the screen as plain text, instead of actually running in the browser. It's a lifesaver. Another huge threat is something called cross-site request forgery. This is where an attacker tricks a logged-in user into submitting a form on your site without them even knowing it. Django's defense is this one simple tag, @CSRF token. You put that inside every form that sends data, and it generates a unique hidden token. Django checks for that token on the backend to make sure the request really came from your website. It's absolutely mandatory for securing your forms. Okay, now for performance. Nobody likes a slow website, and rendering really complex templates can definitely slow things down. So Django gives you several ways to cache things to speed it up. You can use the cache template loader, which compiles templates once and just keeps them in memory. Or you can get really specific and cache just one small, slow part of a template using the @cache% tag. And for pages that rarely change, you can just cache the entire thing. And you even have options for where you store that cache data. For a big, high-traffic site, you'll probably want to use an in-memory system like Memcached or Redis because they are incredibly fast. But hey, for simpler projects, you can even just use your database or the local file system as a caching backend. So, after all of that, what are the big things you really need to remember about Django's template system? Let's boil it down to 3 key takeaways. First, maintainability. That strict separation we talked about, it's not just a nice theory. It makes your project so much easier to manage and grow over time. Second is security. Protections against major attacks like XSS and CSRF are built right in. They're not some optional extra you have to remember. And third, collaboration. The template language is simple enough that front-end designers and back-end developers can actually work in parallel without driving each other crazy. And all this brings us to a final, really interesting question. Some developers find the limitations of the template language, the fact that you can't just run any Python code you want in there, to be a bit restrictive. But for so many others, that very strictness is Django's greatest strength. It forces you into a good architecture, it protects you from silly mistakes, and it keeps your projects clean and secure. So which one is it? A limitation or the very foundation of its power? That's something to think about.